Okay, we're going to take a look at Korea, a brief look at Korea culture and history. There are pottery finds that indicate that humans were in the Korean Peninsula since at least 8000 BCE and probably much further back. The first known kingdom in Korea was the Gojoseon, was founded in 2333 BCE, before Common Era. In medieval Korea, you have the splitting of kingdoms. You have kingdoms in the north, especially in Manchuria, which is in China, and also kingdoms in the south, which control the peninsula. In the 500-600 CE Common Era, you have the spreading of Neo-Confucianism and Buddhism are introduced to Korea, and these ideas will later spread to Japan. Now, there are Japanese invasions in the 1500s. There are two attempts made by Japan to invade and conquer Korea. Both are fought off with Chinese assistance. The Chinese would have their hand in the invasion of Korea as well in 1627. In the 1800s, the Korean kingdom attempted to close all borders but to China. In 1866, the Koreans rise against Catholic missionaries. They are going to try and adopt a domestic policy of isolationism to keep themselves separate from the Western powers and ideas of the Western worlds, and I'll explain why that is the case in a moment. So Korea out of isolation. In 1866, Americans arrive and the attempt to open ports for trade. This will lead to an event called the General Sherman Incident. They wanted to open up trade, and the Koreans did not want to open up trade to the Western powers. So one of the things that European powers and Western powers do is they try, in order to open up trade, they utilize this policy called the gunboat diplomacy. And that's basically you take a bunch of your gunboats up to a harbor where the leader is, and you show this great display of force by firing cannon shots, or just showing your naval force. And these powers, the Eastern powers, would normally just resume trade because they don't want to get their land destroyed by these naval ships. So the Koreans, they told General Sherman that they don't want to trade, and so they kept pushing up the Korean coast. And so the Korean response was to send out some ships that they loaded with wood and set on fire, and they made 3 attempts to sink the German incident, and on the 3rd ship they actually sunk the German ship, or the General Sherman ship, the gunboat. Alright, so in 1876, Japan and Korea signed a trade agreement opening Korean ports to Japanese trade. In 1882, the U.S. eventually leads a campaign in Korea and forces Korea to open up trade with the U.S. In 1897, the Korean Empire declared, but it passes under Russian influence, and Russian influence will have a strong impact on Korea. Now, one reason for Korea wanting to maintain their isolation from the Western powers or European powers is because they saw China go through a unique event called the Opium Wars, which are also known as the Anglo-Chinese Wars. The first Opium War was in 1839 to 1842, and the Second Opium War was in 1856 to 1860s. The British would import opium from its colonies in India, and the citizens or the people of China will learn how to utilize opium. They would add it to tobacco and they would smoke it, and then the people would grow a dependency on this drug, and so this would show by the drastic increase in imports year after year. Now, what this started to do to the Chinese economy, it started draining silver, and the people started growing an addiction to the opium product. The emperor wanted to stop this, so he confiscates all opium and seizes all trade with Britain. What Britain does is they come back with a military expeditionary force, and they force China to reopen trade, where opium will be traded to its people. And this is a black spot in history, especially on Britain's part, where they're forcing the Chinese citizens, forcing China to open up trade, especially with opium, and force them to do it at very low rates. Now, Korea saw these things happen, and this is probably one reason why they wanted to maintain a level of isolationism, because they didn't want any entanglements from Western powers or European powers. Now here you have this picture of this woman holding poppy plants, which is used for opium, talking to a classroom, and because it's still hundreds of years later and they're still trying to correct this opium addiction drug problem with their example of the DARE, or a drug program where they educate their young that this is a very dangerous plant and it could harm your life. So in 1905 we have the coming of the Japanese. In 1905 you have Japan invades Korea during the Russo-Japanese War, and as a result Korea is annexed to Japan in 1910, and Japan will occupy Korea up to 1945 to the conclusion of World War II. Korea suffers under the Japanese rule, and Korean culture is suppressed and Japanese culture is imposed upon Korea. Now after World War II we have this event in history called the Cold War. Now Korea is divided into a Russian-controlled North Korea, which is a communist government, and the South is occupied, or you have the Southern Korea, which is occupied with U.S.-supported government. Now in 1950, North Korea, and history, there's speculation that this was due to the orders of Stalin in Russia. North Korea invades South Korea, and this will cause the U.S. and UN troops to intervene. Now one of the reasons for this invasion from North Korea is they did not think the United States would get involved, or at least that's the speculation, because the Secretary of State, Acheson, gave a detailed report of lands, territories, and countries where the United States would immediately get involved if there was communist power to try and intervene in those countries. Korea was never mentioned on that list, so the Soviets in North Korea mistakenly thought that Korea was free game and the United States was going to get involved. Well, as soon as the invasion happened of 90,000 North Korean forces pouring into South Korea with T-32 or T-34 tanks, about 150 of them, President Truman got the phone call early in the morning and rapidly sent out or dispatched U.S. forces from Japan to go and fight Korea under General MacArthur. So those are some interesting tidbits of information for you to research and study. Okay, now you see on the right you have this landmass of Korea, the Korean Peninsula. You see the red diagram is the original push of the North Korean forces, and as you can see they got really far and almost occupied all of Korea. Now if it wasn't for the U.S. intervention, you see the blue arrows push up into Korea, they were able to fight the North Korean forces back. So the UN-backed South Korea invades the north and pushes communist forces to the Yalu River. Now there was a warning to the U.S. forces that if they go past the 38th parallel, that China would intervene in the war. Now the feeling at the time, according to General MacArthur, he was telling the president that we have nothing to fear, the Chinese wouldn't dare get involved, and lo and behold, the U.S. forces the United Nations, the U.S. forces pushed North Koreans back to the Yalu River, and they started capturing North Korean forces, and they find out that a lot of who they're capturing are actually Chinese. So this is very alarming. So China intervenes with 100,000 Chinese troops. These guys are battle hardened as opposed to the raw soldiers from the U.S., because most of the soldiers after World War II, they went home back to the United States, and so in Japan you have these new raw U.S. forces who weren't exactly prepared to fight this Chinese battle hardened group. So we have a ceasefire after the Chinese and North Korean forces pushed the U.S. back behind the 38th parallel, and there was an armistice agreement. In 1954, there was both sides gathered to sign a peace treaty, but the peace treaty is never signed. Now, modern South Korea has emerged as a high-tech industrial giant. They're one of the Asian tigers of modern industry. South Koreans are some of the most connected people on Earth. They have the most computers and cell phones per person. They're home to a large conglomerate companies known as Chaebol. Okay, now here we have a picture of North Korea. It's a tower, the North Korean tower. It's a symbol of communist failure. This building began construction about 1987, and it ceased construction in 1992 because of the collapse of communism. And today, as of June and July of 2013, or coming up soon, this tower should be constructed, but it sat empty, rotting for a number of years, for 2 decades, and it's just about to be finally completed, and it's probably due to the communist failure of their command economy. Alright, modern North Korea. They're ruled by the dictatorial Kim dynasty of the Communist Party rulers. Their command economy is a failure. Famine is common. The people are they lack food and provisions. There's sanctions that are placed against North Korea because they keep trying to develop nuclear weapons, which they do have. They're trying to arm missiles with nuclear weapons, and they have recently made threats to nuke the United States. Many attempts, or many threats. It is one of the last totalitarian states on Earth. Now, they recently ended the Armistice Agreement of 1953 on March 10th, 2013, again with many threats that they wanted to nuke the United States. So this leads to the question, is North Korea a threat? And here we have this little political cartoon. You see the president of North Korea trying to launch a missile or throw a missile at the U.S. feet, and you'll see this very well combat forces. Now, North Korea has a significant army. They outnumber South Korea 2 to 1 in a lot of ways. They have about 7,000 jets. However, they do not have the capability to sustain a long war because they lack things like fuel to keep these planes in air, as opposed to South Korea, which has plenty of resources to sustain a war. Though they have fewer forces, they have the means to be able to fight. So North Korea, it would be a mistake for North Korea to try and engage in any war. So it's strongly speculated that the North Korea threat is a means where they try to unite the people with fear, to unite their country against the U.S. powers, against South Korea, in an attempt to bully for resources and things of that nature. But you go ahead and you do your research. We're going to talk more in depth about this in class, and I'll see you soon.